Assalamu alaikum, my all dear and beloved SMPNs of Campus 5. How are you doing, guys? Guys, nowadays we are living with a pandemic that is COVID-19. So, we should take some necessary and suggested precautions to fight against COVID-19 so that we may be happy and healthy. And I'm sure you are taking. So, guys, today I welcome all of you in my English class. And in my English class, we are going to have our English literature period. Okay, that's mean we will read again the lesson Great Fire. Okay. So guys, today we will continue our lesson The Great Fire of London, and we'll go to the end. Means we are going to have the climax. We are going to see the climax of the story The Great Fire of London. As always, before going forward to the story and before continue our story, let's have a look on quick preview so that you will be able to understand the story vividly. And I have written some questions and you are able to answer these questions, I'm sure. Question number 1. Who were Ralph, Meg and Peter? Ralph, Meg and Peter were friends. Ralph and Meg were siblings, whereas Peter was an orphan and disabled boy, means having no parents, and he could not walk. All the time he lied on his couch and he needed someone help. One old lady looked after him. Number 2. Why did Ralph and Meg not sleep that night? That night, Ralph and Meg did not sleep as sound as usual because they were expecting their parents. Their parents did not return their home and they were very much anxious. Number 3. Who smelled first the queer smell? When they were not sleeping, Ralph smelled something queer, something strange, a smell of burning. So he told his sister that something was burning anywhere. How did they reach Peter's house? Meg and Ralph were trapped by the fire and they were thinking that what would they do? Suddenly, an idea flashed in Ralph's mind. He picked a bench and with Meg's help, he pushed one end and through the window. Peter saw that and fixed the bench strongly over the window sill. Like that rope, remember? To pass the things from one window to other. Why people were screaming? The people of London were screaming, shouting with fear because the flame of fire was rising like a mountain and they were rushing for their lives. What did Ralph tell to Meg about Peter? Ralph told Meg to stay with Peter when they would reach the river onto the grass because Peter was so anxious and begged that not to leave him alone. Okay? Now guys, here is page number 75. Please turn on it. Okay, now put your finger on the line. I don't expect you are very heavy, Ralphie was saying to Peter, and he is saying for Peter. The noise outside was terrible. The crash of falling beams mingled with the cries of frightened people and the cruel crackle of fire. And above it all rang the church bells clanging, clanging, clanging from all the churches in London town. Guys, the condition became worse. People were crying and screaming, and their voices of crying were mixing with the roaring of falling beams of wood. Beams of wood? rods of wood that supported the houses, with the ringing of bells that was giving a sound of clanging, 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 as the bells from all the churches started ringing to alert the people, and that seemed to be a great disaster. Ralph took a deep breath, for he knew that Peter could be heavy. He started to say, 1, 2, 3, lift, but he stopped at 2. For that moment, 100 tongues of flames surrounded the couch. Ralph paused for a moment. Ralph stayed for a moment, as he had to pick Peter up, and he knew that was difficult task. Then he started counting 1, 2. But guys, when he reached on 2, he had to stop. What happened? As the couch of Peter was surrounded by high flames that seemed to be tongue of any dragon. Not for a moment would Meg and Ralph have left Peter, but the terrible heat drove them back, and before they could do anything to help him, he had done something to help himself. Who did? Yes, Peter did something. Now, even though the people, they means Ralph and Meg, did not leave Peter, but the fierce flames pushed them back, and their efforts to pick Peter became useless or vain. And at that moment, a miracle occurred. Peter did himself something for sake of his own life. Peter, who couldn't walk, Peter, who hadn't left his couch for more than a year, took a flying leap and went rushing downstairs on his own 2 feet. That was the real miracle. What did he do? And how did he do? Peter, who couldn't walk even one step and could not get up himself, suddenly jumped up high and ran downstairs. Yes, on his own feet. Meg and Ralph were too frightened to feel surprised. With the fire singeing their hair and smoke stinging their eyes, they rushed down behind him. Every house seemed to be ablaze, and people were running this way and that. The river, gasped Ralph. Ablaze means burn fiercely. Peter, Ralph and Meg were shivering and astonished to see that for a moment. They stood like a post, and their hair burnt lightly, and they felt a sharp pain as smoke stinged their eyes. They hurriedly ran down behind Peter. Every house almost burnt, and people were running here and there in fear. Ralph guided them to the river, and they were trying to reach the river. Now you can see the whole London was burning. The houses, shops, and churches were ablazed by the fire, and it seemed to be a dragon that took out 100 tongues of flames. The people were rushing towards the bank. They were screaming, shouting, and running in fear. They reached the bank of the river. Now guys, please turn on the page. Open page number 76. Now put your finger on the line. Children ran down a side street to the water's edge. There a barge was moored, and a number of people were scrambling into it. Peter looked strange and ill, and his breath came in heavy gasps. Meg and Ralph held him hand and helped him into the barge. Peter gave a great sigh and then fainted. Students, barge means a small flat-bottomed boat into rivers or canals. And fainted means to become unconscious. Became unconscious. So, the children means all 3 of them, Peter, Ralph, Meg, were running down towards the bank of river or side of the river, there was a barge. A small flat-bottomed boat was fastened or tied with ropes or anchors, and people were trying to crawl into the barge, as that was only a barge or small boat, to save their lives. Peter was tired, as he ran after a long time. That is why he couldn't stand anymore and became unconscious after taking long breath of sadness. Someone pushed the barge away from the bank and it sailed slowly out into the water. "He walked," cried Meg, suddenly, as if he had only just realized it. "Peter walked." She spoke so loudly that everyone turned to look at her. Someone pushed the boat and it was slowly sailing into the water. Now Meg developed her senses, and after developing her senses, she shouted. She started shouting, "Peter walked, Peter walked." She was saying so loudly that everyone listened and turned to her and attentive to her. Then, "He hasn't been able to stand for more than a year," she continued, "and when his house caught fire, he jumped off the couch and ran right from the bedroom to the river. Wasn't it strange? Wasn't it strange?" She was talking. She kept talking. She continued that Peter had not been able to stand and he needed help, but when fire blazed his house, he jumped and left his couch and ran towards the river. She was asking to the people that was it strange? Was that strange? "It was a miracle," said a motherly woman, dipping her handkerchief in the water and cooling his head. "It was the shock, you see. It gave him the use of his legs. Again, such things do happen sometimes. It's wonderful," murmured Raph. "It's wonderful." One of the women who was dipping her handkerchief into the water to make herself cool became emotional and said that was an exceptional case or an amazing occurrence, means miracle, occurred with Peter. Such that miracle happened sometime. Now Peter could use his legs and he was able to walk, and Raph and Meg were speaking slowly. That was wonderful. Now people crawled into a barge standing at the bank of the river. A barge, a boat, flat bottomed into canals and rivers. Now guys, turn on the page, open page number 78. Now put your finger on the line. The children turned round for a moment to look at the fire. All London was burning. Churches, shops, houses crackled and blazed and fell. The sky was red with flame and the river shone like a river of pure gold. The children were sailing away from the bank of the river, and while they were sailing away, they turned and saw back to their city. The city, London, was burning. All the houses, churches, shops burnt and fell down. Due to high flames, the sky grew red and the river became golden, as it was a river of gold. Everything was destroyed. "Well, it's the end of London," remarked an old man. "Not the end," said someone else. "It's the beginning of a new London, and in some ways it's a good thing. Look at all the illness we have had in the past few years, and then the plague as well. The fire should put an end, made of stone and not so close together. Think of it. A new London with wide streets and houses of stone." An old man who was so upset, He started sharing his views that now London was ended, finished, destroyed. We were all destroyed, but someone else gave a positive remarks that it was not end, but it was the beginning of new London. We would build our new houses with stones or bricks, with wide streets, and also we got rid of the disease plague that we had been suffering from long time, few years. Just then Peter opened his eyes and sat up slowly in the barge. He looked puzzled for a moment, then a look of joy and wonder came to his face. I walked, he said. I ran. I'm better at last. Isn't it wonderful? Peter became conscious. He opened his eyes and got up into the barge, into the small boat. When he realized what happened to him, his face became shiny and he was as happy as a lark. He started shouting. I ran, I walked. Now I could walk and I could run. He was feeling better. That was wonderful. That was so wonderful before. Then great fire. Yes, murmured Ralph and Meg. It must be the most wonderful thing that ever happened. The children forgot for a while that they had lost their homes and all their possessions. They thought only about Peter. Peter could walk, and they smiled and held each other's hand and gazed at the great fire of London. The children forgot all their worries, all their tensions, that they lost their houses, their valuables, their property, but they remembered one thing, that Peter could walk now. They were smiling and holding their hands and watching the great fire of London. So, the story got happy ending. And for people of London and the children, the great fire brought happiness and new beginning of the life. Okay. Now here are some new words and their meanings. Number 1, terrible. Extremely bad or serious. Full of terror. The terrible crime. He committed a terrible sin. Number 2, frightened. Afraid or anxious. Scared, afraid, anxious. I saw a frightened child. It is an adjective. Now leap. Move quickly and suddenly jump. Jump suddenly with great force. Polly leapt to her feet. Singe. Burn something superficially or lightly. Scorching. Remove the hair by passing rapidly over a flame. The fire singed his eyebrows. Ablaze. Burning fiercely. All the houses were ablaze in fire. Barge. A long flat bottom boat on canals or rivers. Barge. They reached the barge. Moor. Make fast a boat by attaching it by rope. Tie up. To make fast a boat by attaching rope. Fasten by a rope. The boat was moored by anchor to the bank. Miracle. An outstanding example of something, an exceptional product or achievement, an amazing occurrence. It was a miracle. Nobody died in the accident. Okay, have you got it? Now students, it's time for review of the lesson The Great Fire that we have read the whole. We have read the whole story. So what did you learn? What did you read? As always, I have written some questions and I'll explain one by one. And I'm sure, I hope you will be answering the question with me. Now question number 1, what was spreading? Yes, the fire was spreading everywhere. Now what did the fire spread? Why did the fire spread very quickly? The fire spread very quickly because all the houses were made of wood instead of stones or bricks. Now, how did Peter help himself? Peter took a flying leap, means jumped high, and were rushing down the stairs on his own feet. Yes, that was a miracle. Now, what happened to Peter? Peter helped himself by taking a high jump as his couch was surrounded by the fire. Now he was safe and he could run like Raph and Meg. Now, where did they reach? They reached by the river and onto the grass. Now, what was the positive remark of people about London? All the houses, churches burned fiercely and fell down. That was a disaster for the people of London. Before that plague, a disease spread out in the city. The fire put an end to the germs of this disease. That is why people were not sad, but they had positive remarks for the great fire. And they decided to rebuild their houses with stones and bricks. So, a new London was built after the great fire. Okay? Guys, every story has its lesson, or every lesson has its moral. So, the moral of the lesson, the great fire, is it was a horrible sight. All the London was burning. People were running for their lives. And before the great fire, plague, a disease, had broken out in the city, and people were dying of it. The fire put an end to the germs of this disease. Moreover, people decided to make better houses made of stones instead of wood. So a new London was built after this great disaster. So we should not be hopeless in any trouble and be positive in any condition. As the people of London were not sad and were thinking positively. On the other hand, we should be kind to others and be willing to extend a helping hand to them, like Meg and Raph. They always helped Peter because Peter was disabled and he needed their help. So guys, I suggest you to stay positive in every condition. Be happy and stay healthy and alive. I hope guys you have understood the whole story and you have gotten the positive moral of the lesson. So goodbye and Allah Hafiz.